Hey y'all, how's it going? Just a quick follow-up video from yesterday's video because for some reason, especially on YouTube, the video started sort of taking off, so a lot of people are chiming in. Some people have questions, some people have comments. So I just wanted to follow up on those instead of replying to comments, just kind of do a general video. Yeah, it would be cool sometime to have like a dialogue more so people can ask questions and such. And just real quick, just the point of our Instagram and YouTube channel is we're not selling anything. We're not selling seeds. We're not, I run a tincture company, so an old school olive oil wellness tincture company. That's what we actually do. We're a licensed cannabis operator in the Santa Cruz Mountains, but kind of the focus of our YouTube channel especially is more, we're not actually selling things, we're not selling seeds, we're just raising awareness for folks who are curious about different kinds of cannabis from around the world, and especially people who are kind of maybe a little bored or tired or not digging the newer sort of modern super hybridized cannabis that's kind of taken over the whole California and Amsterdam scene and such like that. And I've been a big cannabis enthusiast for decades and decades, and so like the 80s and 90s is when I was first getting into cannabis. And back then the experience was just very psychedelic, very uplifting, really silly, giggly, mind expanding, and sort of like amplified everything. And it was, it wasn't uncommon to just sit there and laugh and laugh and laugh and giggle and feel like you're in a cartoon. So that's kind of what cannabis has always been, sort of that psychedelic on the verge of like mushrooms experience for me. And I've always been trying to get back to that. And but a lot of the modern genetics right now are more of a like a sedative opiate kind of just couch lock situation, which has its time and place, no judgment or anything, but there's a ton of other experiences out there. So we're just raising awareness. If people are interested in exploring and going on their own adventures to discover different types of cannabis, then cool. That's all we're doing. We're just sharing information. Maybe it'll spark some curiosity. And it's like our own adventure, and we're just sharing it. So if you're interested, cool. That's it. And by the way, people, I get tons of messages about selling seeds. Just right now, just so you know, most of the seeds that we're growing, the plants that we have, I only have 10 or 20 of those seeds. So I source them from all different places. I have a lot of friends who are skateboarders without giving up everything, but there's a lot of non-profit skate parks that are built in some really interesting parts of the planet. So that's a real cool way for folks to source really interesting cannabis as well. But then there's tons of online seed traders and everything like that. But I've had a lot of these seeds for a long time. It's just finally I'm able to grow these out now, because in California we can grow more than 10 plants at a time now. So anyway, that said, that was a long explanation, but wanted to follow up with yesterday's post. And one thing, a lot of people have been saying or commenting that the semi-auto trait that we're seeing like in this plant, but then also that happens in these Iranian plants that you can see right here, they're just stretching right now. So like early July, depending on when you run them and such like that. But the main point is they'll go into flower at the longest day of the year here in California. So when we're having like 14 and a half, 15, 16-hour days of sunlight, these plants will actually go into flower. And so a lot of people are very familiar with Ruderalis and just assume that these are Ruderalis or they're crosses of Ruderalis. But just wanted to share. I'm not trolling, not debating anyone, but my experience in growing a lot of different landrace varieties is that there's actually these plants are, some people call them semi-autos. I started calling them 18-hour flowers just so it makes more sense and I don't have to do this long explanation, but here I am doing a long explanation again about what they are. These plants tend to be from the Middle East and North Africa. So some folks are aware of, there's the Beldia keef plant from Morocco. And I've grown a bunch of those before. Really beautiful, small little plants, but they have this same trait. So when you plant the seed, the plants will get maybe about this big. And by the way, these plants are small. I'm very aware of that because these were in 5-gallon pots. This is the kind bud, what I'm calling the kind bud 90s plant. But I also have other ones that are going to be 10 feet tall. These just stayed in, anyway, I'll explain that in a minute. So anyway, the Beldia keef plant is a landrace from Morocco, and what it does is you plant the seeds and it grows. You can veg them as long as you want. I've done it with them. If you keep a light over them, 24 hours light, they'll keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but as soon as the light goes under 18 hours of light, they'll immediately start flowering. And some people say, oh, well then that's just cross Ruderalis. I'll explain Ruderalis in a minute, but they're not Ruderalis crosses. These, like the Beldia keef plant, has been grown for decades and decades, if not centuries, in Morocco. So they developed their own landrace variety that just has that 18-hour flower or semi-auto trait, but it's still photosensitive. So 300 years ago, folks in Morocco didn't order Ruderalis plants or Ruderalis crosses from an Amsterdam seed bank, and they didn't probably go to Siberia to go source Ruderalis genetics. It's just cannabis is this insanely adaptive plant. So when you put it in any environment, it is very quick and agile and will just adjust to whatever that environment is. And with the farmer, with the human working with the plant through a few generations of selective breeding, cannabis will all of a sudden shapeshift into a different type of plant and a different variety with different traits that work for that environment, whatever the farmer's needs are, goals, or intentions. So in Morocco, I guess it gets super hot and water goes away mid to late summer. So it was just important to have plants there that could finish up, flower, get everything done by midsummer before things got too crazy hot and dry. And so that seemed to be the trait that they bred for that just sped that process along. But it's still a completely photosensitive plant. Now, other plants that have that same trait in the Middle East there's the Egyptian Sinai. I've grown some plants from Iraq that have that trait, some Lebanese and Syrian plants as well. Oh, and then also Turkish plant. I've seen the same exact trait. And these are old school landrace. These aren't new modern autoflower Ruderalis hybrids. So there seems to be some, anyway, and a lot of folks aren't familiar with those plants. I wasn't familiar with them until I grew them. Oh, and by the way, this Iranian plant that we grow, and just to demonstrate that it's not a Ruderalis or it's not even a Ruderalis cross, is so this plant will go into flower right now. We're July 5th right now, and it's just going into flower. But this is actually a clone of one of these plants. And I've just been keeping it under light. But you'll see, like Ruderalis plants, you can't really clone because they have an internal clock. And I know you can do crosses that then will trigger for an earlier flower time. But these really truly are, these Iranian, purely photosensitive. You can control, as long as you keep the light over 18 hours, I do 20 hours just to be safe. You can grow them huge, like 10-foot monster plants. So anyway, so if that makes any sense, and again, I'm not debating anyone, or I'm just sharing my experience, and I think there's really a whole nother category of plants that a lot of folks aren't totally familiar with that have this semi-auto trait that are not actually related to Ruderalis whatsoever. And for folks who don't know what Ruderalis is, Ruderalis tends to be from like Russian area, sort of Siberian area, where they only have a 3-month, so imagine Alaska as well. They're not from Alaska, but imagine like that high longitude on the planet, is that there's only a 3-month summer. So the cannabis there, the Ruderalis, developed where it had to get its entire life cycle done just in 3 months before the winter came and the cold and and everything froze. So from seed to final plant bearing seeds, like flowering and bearing seeds, has to all get done in 90 days. And the other thing that's interesting, so when you're up in like Alaska or northern longitudes with like Siberia and such, is the sun up there during the summer, if you've ever gone to Alaska or such, you know the sun never goes down, so you get 24 hours of light. So the Ruderalis learned to ignore the light. It's no longer photosensitive because it's not a flowering light cycle, because the sun's up 24 hours a day. It's constant sun during the peak of summer. So the Ruderalis just ignored how much light there is, and it now the Ruderalis has an internal clock, regardless of how much light you shine on it. It just, within 90 days, it needs to get its stuff done. So you could turn off the lights, you could turn on the lights, you could do whatever you want with the lights, and it doesn't affect. It's completely ignores all the lighting. And because of that, Ruderalis, you can't clone them either, because once they go into flower, there's no stopping it. That clock is going. Now again, there's some folks who've crossed Ruderalis into photosensitive plants, and that's where things, you know, the lines get blurred a little bit. And I can see, and I totally understand why some people think these Middle Eastern and North African varieties with the semi-auto trait or 18-hour flower think that they're just Ruderalis crosses. But if that's the case, that would mean that Egyptian, Turkish, Syrian, Lebanese, Moroccan, Iranian all made Ruderalis crosses like hundreds of years ago. Like went up to Russia or wherever, you know, up in the Siberian area, and went and sourced Ruderalis genetics and then crossed them. And it doesn't seem to be that that's the case. The more likely scenario is that they just had their photosensitive plants that were introduced into the area, and then they just selectively bred for the plants that started flowering quicker, but they're still photosensitive, but just they'll flower any time of year when the light's under 18 hours, which is pretty much anywhere on the planet, if that makes sense, unless you're like way super up north or south. So hopefully that makes sense. And again, I'm not debating anyone, just sharing my observations, is that there seems to be a whole different category of plants that maybe not a lot of folks are aware of. I wasn't aware of them until, you know, like 6-7 years ago, when I first started growing some of these Middle Eastern and North African varieties. But yeah, there seems to be a different category of plants that have this 18-hour flower trait that are actually not related to Ruderalis. And I actually prefer the 18-hour flower trait because I have total control of the plant, where I can continue to veg them as long as I want to, and then when I'm ready to flower, you just take off that light and boom, they'll go. It'll go on July 5th. You'll end up with plants like this that are almost done flowering. And now, as far as some people talked a little smack and said like these plants are wimpy or looked underfed or spindly and not good looking plants. So a little explanation for why this plant looks this way. And I know their leaves are a little light and such, but what happened was I grew these seeds. These were like old school 90s Grateful Dead parking lot type kind bud. It's kind of a long story where they came from. But, and that's a quest that I have to go back and recreate those or find those genetics from the 90s that was called sort of kind bud. It wasn't a specific variety or strain. It was just like a category that was really awesome in the 80s, 90s. So anyway, these plants, I started them in 5-gallon pots, like this size pot, and with the intention of taking them out full season. And to grow them, 10 feet tall, big, huge monsters, as you may have seen in some of our other videos at our Landrace Botanical Garden. And we don't grow 100% Landrace there, but just fun, interesting plants. So anyway, they were in 5-gallon pots. They started flowering early. That caught me by surprise. And then I thought perhaps they were going to come out of flower, because sometimes a plant will pre-flower and then go back into veg as the days are getting longer. But these plants ended up not re-vegging, and they fully committed to flowering. So at that point, they were stuck in 5-gallon pots and getting, a little root bound and malnourished, and they just weren't totally stoked. So then I just recently upped them to this size pot to give them a little more root space. The other plants that you saw yesterday, yes, they were underfed, root bound, heat stressed, everything, but the genetics are cool and they're solid. So I pollinated those. They're going to create seeds, but later on with those new batch of seeds, we'll grow those. And if we put them in the ground, like this plant right here, if it wasn't so far along in flower, if I put this in the ground, 10 days later it'll come back and this will be like deep emerald green, just like this or this. So a lot of times, and I've just found with limited resource and time and everything, I just keep plants in a 5-gallon pot, and then when it's time to actually put them in the ground, even though they may be getting a little stressed, by the time I get them in the ground, within 10 days they're super emerald green and then just taking off and charging. So anyway, that's my explanation. That's not an excuse, but that's just an explanation for why, yeah, these plants are small, by the way, and a little beat up looking or stressed is because I wasn't planning on actually growing them out and flowering them. They were just in 5-gallon pots. Now, full disclosure, there's some other seeds from this same batch that didn't start flowering early, and I have them out in our Boulder Creek property now, and they're about like this big. So we'll see. So these it was like half of the phenos actually started flowering early, and then they committed and they kept going. So that's when I went ahead and just pollinated them, because I'm like, man, these things are just good. They're going to get it done. They're fully committed to flower. Anyway, I hope that makes sense, and feel free to comment, ask questions, but that's what's going on. And then as far as people, tons of comments asking about seeds. And just so you know, most of these plants that you see me growing, I only have 10 or 20 of those seeds. And then I grow them out and share the videos with you to just, as we're discovering and learning about those plants, we shoot videos for our own documentation, but then we share that with you. But yeah, and not trying to be rude or anything, but a lot of people ask for seeds thinking we have like this giant seed bank of all these varieties. But in reality, I only have 10 or 20 seeds. I grow them out. If they're really cool plants that I want to keep around, that's when we'll actually do a seed increase, and that's a pretty involved process. But yeah, and sorry, I I have very limited seeds, only 10, 15, 20 seeds, and only a handful of these plants have I been able to do seed increases on. And then at some point, if our laws ever change and chill out and we can start shipping seeds, and I know people are doing it, but I'm fully licensed, so I can't really risk. It's not groovy with our California cannabis license. I have to sell seeds through a dispensary, and that's a whole nother thing. So yeah, right now, so sorry, just showing you the plants. If you like them, get on Google. I'll tell you what the plant is, and there's good possibility you might be able to find it. Some of them, you know, came from, you know, just personal friends and such who traveled to places, so not all of them, but yeah, if you spend 15-20 minutes Googling around, there's a good possibility you'll find them. So anyway, hope that's helpful. And it's getting hot. I'm gonna go, but anyway, you guys have a nice weekend. Bye.